Hey, hey, hey. Welcome back to Trek Chats, a podcast brought to you by Trek on the Tube. As usual, I am your host, Sean. And joining me today are two very special guests. One is returning. He's a good friend. You know him as Boatrek or PJ. He hasn't been on in a while, but I thought I'd bring him back. How you doing? Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
And our second guest is someone a little special for the Trekkie community, Noah AK. How you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm pleased with that abbreviation of my last name. I think I should just change it permanently to that.
Well, I didn't risk it. I was like, spell
It's funny.
AK, I'll use AK.
I so many people always are like, how do we say it? How do you say it? They'll ask me before something starts. I'll give it to them, and it'll still go horribly wrong, and they'll just feel bad, and I feel bad for them because I don't expect anybody to get it. So I think you've made the right call. Just skirt the whole problem altogether. I think that was the smart move.
Well, again, thank you so much for joining us. Today, we're going to talk a bit about fan influence on the franchise, and I had in mind maybe talking a bit about what's happening today, I guess, because there's a lot more fans that are part of like the creative teams, or that, for like in your case, get to be on the shows. But also, it all started with the Okudas and with like fans back in the 60s actually relaunching Star Trek, getting Star Trek a third season. So like fan influence on the franchise, not to mention like shipping and all of the headcanon that's been going on for so many years. Like fans have always had a lot of power when it comes to Star Trek. So let's talk about you for a second, Noah,
It's my
and
favorite
jump.
topic.
Well, there you go. And jumping into you, you've been a fan of Star Trek for years and years and years, and you got to actually be a character in Star Trek Discovery. So how was that?
Yeah, I grew up on Star Trek. It was sort of always on in my house, and when I was a kid and my early teenage years, I went to conventions and stuff. So it was just always been a very big influence. My mom has been very into it, and she sort of brought me in. And yeah, it's just sort of has always been this thing. I feel like many Trekkies know this. It's like everyone is like, oh, this is so and so, they do this, and this is, blah, 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 and they're a Trekkie. And so that was always sort of the addendum to anybody, getting to know my mom was the, and she's a Trekkie addendum. So it was always sort of a big thing. And then, first my then girlfriend, then fiance, current wife got on the show, which was incredible and was amazing for me. And then I got to be on the show, which was also incredible and amazing for me. So it's been a really, really fun thing that I got to do, and a cool and lucky thing, and I think a thing that is actually pretty unique. The sort of fan culture that we have now kind of comes out of Trek culture, with like cons and conventions and
Oh yeah.
cosplay. And so I have a very unique experience of growing up on this thing and, going to the conventions and wearing the costumes before cosplay was called cosplay, and then getting to do it. It's just a really special and I think pretty unique thing that, I suspect in, another 20 or 30 years or whatever, all these kids who have come up on Marvel and DC and Star Wars, these sort of big properties, and probably Trek too, there will be I have a feeling that my experience will become a lot more common, which I think is just really, really cool, and it'll be a lot of fun.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. So that like all of the fans in the world can all every acting fan can become an actor on the show. But then it's not just actors now, because we've got people like Mike McMahon, which has been able to create his own show, and he's been a fan of TNG and the '90s era Star Trek for years and years and years.
Yes, exactly. So it's gonna come from all angles, and it's sort of already happening. And again, I think Trek is sort of on the frontier, on the cutting edge of that, because it's just been around for so long, and the sort of fan culture has been so steady and so unique.
So, being an Andorian, for people that don't remember, or for that are having a hard time recalling, our boy here was Rin, the Andorian with the missing antenna in Star Trek Discovery Season 3. Being an Andorian, an established species, did you bring into, like, were you stressing out about that? Embodying this character that's been part of, like, an established species, or did you just try to, like, not think about that and
I
do your own
think, you
thing?
know, my whole experience, I got super lucky with a lot of things. I got lucky to work with Jonathan Frakes as much as I did. I got lucky to get to work with so much of the cast on the show and in all these different locations. And I actually think one of the luckiest things that I did get was to get to play an Andorian, because they're so iconic. You know, they're just like undeniably Star Trek. They are sort of at the same time very like campy and goofy and funny looking, but also extremely alien, and in a way that not all Star Trek aliens are. You know, sometimes it's just like, it feels like a Bajoran is just a very simple sort of single prosthetic and an earring, or you have, you know, a Kelpian, which is like this full different face mask. And because of the coloring, I think that, you know, Orions and Andorians really like straddle this line of being so identifiable. But at the same time, you know, one of the great things is like there isn't this huge lore Bible, you know. It's not like playing a Vulcan or a Klingon or a Cardassian or even like a Borg rescue, you know? There isn't this huge backlog or this huge Bible or this huge history, which definitely took some of the pressure off, which was great, you know? And it also is really fun because then it really feels like sort of every decision that I make or everything I get to say is sort of like insta-canon, you know, which is just so exciting, you know, because it's like, basically it's like everything that Shran did and then everything that I did, you know. But what
it establishes precedent, and I feel like that's what would stress me out the most.
Yeah, you know, I'm less worried about establishing precedent and more worried about breaking precedent. You know what I mean? Because like I don't want to be the one to, you know, be like for everyone to be like, well, Andorians actually suck. You know what I mean? I don't want to be that guy, you know, or to be the guy who's like, you know, so many people have asked me, you know, hey, why didn't your antenna grow back? Why didn't your antenna go back? And I, you know, it's a totally great question and something that I thought about a lot. And I would hate to be in a position where I was getting that question times a million, because like it's already hard enough to sort of field one question, you know, when it's something I love and that I care about and I'm invested in both on either side of the camera, you know. I want to keep everybody happy. I want to keep myself happy. So I was relieved to not have to sort of do all that heavy lifting that I've seen my friends have to do. And it's very challenging. And you sort of just, you know, it puts you in an uncomfortable position, because a lot of the time the decisions that you represent are not decisions that you made. You know, there's things that were handed to you that you have to make work, and then you become the representative of, and sometimes those are great and sometimes, you know, they just are what they are. But I definitely, you know, one of the great things about knowing Star Trek so well is that the turnaround time, not just from getting cast, but to finding out I was going to be an Andorian, was not a lot. You know, it was, I can't actually remember, but it couldn't have been more than a week or two. But you know, I really knew exactly where to look in terms of like, okay, what do I need to know? What do I need to watch so that I know everything about Andorians, you know? And so I basically just, you know, made a list outside of the, you know, the original series episodes. It was essentially just a list of Enterprise episodes with Shran, and watched all of those, and basically just tried to, by osmosis or whatever, just sort of assimilate as much of what Jeffrey Combs sort of brought to the performance as I could into my performance. And that was the real thing that sort of kept me up at night, was like, man, you know, like it's such a distinctive and amazing, you know, it's a performance I love, but it's very distinctive. The attitude and the sort of vibe is just very distinctive. And Shran is, you know, a very unique character, and Rin was not like Shran in a ton of ways. And so the thing that once I finished filming and I knew everything that was, and I would just sit there and think, man, was I Andorian enough? Was I Combs enough? You know, like, are people going to be like, these two things don't match up? I don't get it. This sucks, you know? And that definitely, I would just sort of shoot out of bed at like 3 a.m, being like, I should have been more Andorian. I should have done this. You know what I mean? So even though it was just this small, you know, it's like 12 episodes essentially are the Andorian Bible. And even with that, I still was, you know, having night terrors of Jeffrey Combs, like being like, you failed me, you failed, you know? So, yeah, it was both. It was definitely both.
I think I can confidently speak for the fandom and say that you did a good job.
Thank God.
I think everyone liked it.
Well, the character comes across as kind of like a lost puppy dog. He's a very sympathetic character, and then I have an answer for why the antennae don't grow back.
I want to hear it. I want to hear it.
Your character didn't stick around long enough.
That's the right answer. That is the right answer.
Like,
you know,
they would have grown back, but you know.
How annoying would it have been if we spent, you know, I'm there for 3 episodes, whatever screen time. You spend 5 minutes getting my antenna back. I'm like, yes, I finally am back. And then she shoots me in the face. That would have been such a letdown, you know? So I think they were smart to not keep it in. You know, my headcanon is that, you know, when we first see this happen, it's with Archer and he does this very clean cut and everybody's in on it. When I got it done to me, it's by some evil warlord who winds up shooting me in the face. So she's obviously not going to just let it grow back. You know, she's going to pour acid on it or stick a worm in there or do something Star Trek-y. You know, she knows better. And
were there any other discussions about your character and Tilly getting together? Because we had discussions about that. We thought that was going to happen.
Mary and I had lots of discussions about that, and obviously, you know, it was obviously, you know, that's what I want. That's what I want on every show that I do. I don't care if it's Star Trek or not. And we, you know, here's what's very funny is that we didn't. I purposefully did not get information about his arc because I knew he was going to die. I knew that was the other thing is like, I knew Star Trek too well, and particularly this show too well to have any illusions that he was really going to stick around. I saw the writing on the wall far before anyone else because
a sympathetic character coming out of the blue.
Who is the best friend of the other sympathetic character who sort of is like, you know, charming, but also maybe has a dark side. It's like, I'm dead, you know, it's just a matter of time. And I was okay with that. I was great with that. But I also didn't want to say, hey, you know, can you tell me where this ends? Because I knew I would be so disappointed when I was shooting episode 2, knowing I was going to die in episode 3, that I probably wouldn't do a very good job, or at least I wouldn't do the job that I would want to do. So I decided, you know, let me just be in the moment and really soak it all in, as opposed to sort of being disappointed that it was all going to end, even though it was always going to end. So, you know, I didn't know what the dynamic would be between Mary and I, and we were super excited to, you know, suddenly have these 2 scenes together. It was like amazing. And
you give each other notes?
Well, you know, we talked about it. We didn't give each other notes, but we talked about, hey, you know, maybe there is something going on here. Maybe this is, you know, we both read the script. Oh, I don't know, you know, and we were just talking, maybe something's happening. So, you know, we have this scene in the captain's ready room where I come in, I'm like, I want to talk to the captain, and she shuts me down. You know, don't talk to me like that or whatever she says. And I came in, I was like, all right, it's time to set up this dynamic. You know, let's have a lover's spat. Let's go back and forth. You know, let's really feel the heat between us. And so I come in and I'm like fired up. You know, I bust through the door. Where's this captain? You know, tell me where the captain is. And she's like, you don't talk to me like that. And I'm like, oh, that was awesome. There was absolute fire between the two of us. And I'm behind the closed doors again, waiting for the next tape. And Jonathan Frakes comes around the corner. And I think I had worked with him. Maybe this was my first day. It might have been the second day with Jonathan. And he goes, Noah, I just need you to like really take it down. Just bring it down. Just take it way, way down. You know, it's not quite that. And I thought, oh, this is the worst day of my life. I think I'll probably just, you know, call Osira and just have her shoot me now, because this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me in my entire life. And so, you know, I'm just sort of like, I bring it down and I sort of survive the rest of the day, and I'm walking off set at the end of the day. and I'm like hanging my head. I've still got my mask on, so it's very heavy. So my head is, very much hanging. And Mary sort of meets up with me as we're walking back to our trailer, and I can tell, she's like not having a great day too. And I'm like, babe, what's going on? What's the matter? And she goes, well, I was coming into the scene really hot because I thought we were going to have this lovers spat, and Jonathan Frakes told me to tone it down. And I was like, oh my God, I did the same exact thing. So we both had the idea to like come in and do this lover spat independently of each other. And Jonathan was like, hey, I don't know what's going on between the two of you, but that is not the scene. So, we tried to make it happen. And then, of course, watching it back, it's like, oh, of course not. It's like we're just trying to find out what's going on with Book on the surface. So we did everything we could to will it into existence, but it just wasn't meant to be this time.
Yeah, sadly, you guys aren't the writers. You can't just will things.
I cannot tell you how hard I tried to will it into existence. And there was another scene where it was the last scene. It was the last scene where we had together, which was actually just me, Book, and her, and like she's going to save the ship, and me and Book are going to hold these guys off. And she's heading out the airlock, and it's a funny thing because you really, as an actor, you sort of have to, especially as an actor coming into a show, you really have to sort of manage like, okay, I'm here to sort of serve this story, and I sort of have to fall into the sort of depth charts, Book's story, Tilly's story, my story's sort of at the bottom, and then the overarching story as well. But at the same time, you have to show up and be committed and be 100%. So I remember for a couple of takes, Tilly goes out the door, and it's her sort of last moment, and Mary kind of looks over her shoulder back at me, and I sort of am holding this gun, and she's standing very like mournfully but powerfully as I look at her go, and Jonathan Frakes goes, Noah, get out of the way. We're trying to get David in the shot.
Oh, no.
It's like, dude, we're not doing that. So, it was funny, because I'm just trying to make this meaningful moment between me and my wife. And everyone's like, it's Book's moment, dude. Get out of here. So it was pretty funny.
Oh, no. Well, you say that you don't have that much influence, but talking about Mary Wiseman and Tilly, there kind of is fan influence on the show just by how people are and how people live, because Mary Wiseman is vegan, and just that kind of impacts the show, because there's like, I think it's in the short tracks, I forget when it is, but there's a moment where she asks for like non-dairy product or whatever it is at the replicator. So in that sense, like...
Mary's vegan? Mary's not vegan.
Is she not?
My wife is most certainly not vegan. Now, we were vegetarian at one point.
Oh no, I really thought she was.
You know
Where
what?
are you getting your information, Sean?
I'm here to give you the inside track on Mary Wiseman. She is not vegan, but maybe. Yeah, I don't know. You could cut this part out of the episode if you want.
Oh, no, leave it in, whatever. This is coming from like I think it was a panel that I'd watched back in season 1, like for like a panel before
she might have been vegan at that point. That's possible. Let's say this, because honestly, I trust.
Well, I had a whole thing. A whole thing about she's vegan in real life, and then she's ordering like non-dairy product or whatever it is from the replicator. Totally, so it's fan influence.
She could have been doing like vegan for a week. Season 1 was actually a pretty long time ago. We're talking almost 4 years ago. So
2016 when you guys were when they were filming.
Short Treks was probably 2017. So Honestly, you're probably right, but I will say this: she is no longer a vegan.
Well, she's your wife. You would know better than me, if I'm honest. But no, I had a whole thing. I was like, oh my goodness, she's vegan, and now she's influencing the show. I felt like it because I remember a thing where she wasn't eating meat. Maybe she was just vegetarian. She wasn't eating meat for the Gormaganda meat.
We were vegetarian for a while, but we have since. This is Trek food update. We have since stopped our vegetarian ways, mainly because when we were in New York during the quarantine, it was just really challenging to do that, so we gave up. We're failures, but that's okay. We stand by our choices.
Well, it's all about balance. It's not, it's finding, it's not excessive, amounts of meat or whatever it is. That's what's important.
Exactly.
But yeah, I don't know. I'd engraved that in my mind because there's like there's a whole bonus feature on season 1 about like the Gormaganda meat and how it wasn't, they didn't actually go and hunt a Gormaganda. Yeah, no, they had like a gelatinous paste or whatever it was, but I think it was made out of agar-agar or something like that, which is a plant-based thing.
That tracks. I believe it.
Are you vegan, Sean?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm not.
Well, look at that. No vegans in the whole lot of us.
I had chicken today.
I'm trying to think of the ways that, I think for people who are on the show more regularly, they do have a lot more influence, and I think that influence shows up in actually smaller ways that like I wouldn't even really be able to track, as opposed to making like a large, like you can pitch ideas, whatever. It's challenging actually for, especially on this show, for a lot of people to actually like pitch character ideas or character arcs, because the writer's room is in LA. And so you'll have, at least not during the pandemic, you would have whoever was writing the episode fly out and be on set for that episode. But at that point, the episode's already written, the arc is already written. And a lot of the way that this show works, as opposed to previous Trek shows, or I should say, second generation Trek shows, next gen to Enterprise, is the sort of week to week writing process is much different, because they were doing 24 episodes. They're sort of churning out script after script. They're doing these sort of like monster of the week, problem of the week stuff. Whereas at least with Discovery, in the off season, they're crafting the full season arc. They're thinking about not just the story arc, but the arc for each character, where each character starts and where they finish. So it's a little bit more challenging to sort of pitch these overarching, I want my character to end up here, I want them to have this experience, because it's just harder to sort of make that happen when you're sort of, have all these spinning plates. But what does happen a lot is the smaller things, like, oh, instead of saying this, can I say this? Instead of liking this, can I like this? So those little things would make sense to me. David, a lot, where I got to work with David Ajal a lot, and he's constantly, he's sort of changing the lines to fit how he thinks Book would say them, and I found that really refreshing, and I felt like on that set people were really receptive to it, because it wasn't that, oh, I don't want to say it that way, you'll say it that way, but he says, can I try like this, can I add this, can I pepper this in here? And I feel like those are the things that really make the characters like individuals, and especially make them individual to each actor.
Well, it's fun because that kind of echoes back to like George Takei in the original series. Like there's this whole story about they wanted to hand him a samurai sword in that episode where he loses inhibitions, but then George Takei said, "Oh no, I want a fencing sword because I've always been fascinated with fencing."
Yeah.
So that was a kind of small decision that ultimately doesn't have that much impact. They kind of canonized the fact that George Takei, or that Sulu has like knowledge on weaponry as the original series goes on. But yeah, so that also, it was kind of fan influence, I guess, on how the character was.
Yeah, I think that happens quite a bit, of depending on the script and depending on the director, the actor sort of saying, hey, could I try it like this? Could I do this? Could I, just kind of peppering it with ideas, and when things are running smoothly, it can be really collaborative and can really fill out the characters in a really fun way.
So what do you guys think about social media and content creators and their impact on the franchise as a whole, if there is any?
Well, that's an interesting question. I think that, for
careful now, because PJ and I are content creators, so maybe
no, you're.
I'm barely a content creator.
For new Trek, I feel like there's sort of a subset of the content creator internet that is just there to sort of shit on everything, and
they're a different lot. We don't.
That's really, and I think actually sometimes it feels like they have almost an outside influence because it's so angry and aggressive. But I would say that they have no influence, on how that comes. And in terms,
I feel like an angry mob, like outside of the gate, or like outside of the fence, on the other side. That's how I view them.
Yes, but then when you look a little closer, it's like 2 or 3 people, and they're just trying to make money. So forget them, whatever. But I think that in terms of, content creators or internet stuff, I don't think that. Well, look, let me be 100% clear. I don't really know. You know what I mean? It's just sort of my sort of speculation on the inside, a little bit, seeing a little bit behind the curtain. I think where most of the fan influence is coming from the sort of, I don't want to say memes, because I don't really mean like, just the jokes, but sort of the gestalt that has been accumulated over basically, the last 20, 30 years, the sort of ideas that have persisted post Enterprise, or the things that people have always wanted to see that have sort of like gained a sort of cultural relevance. And I think part of that has to do with content creators, sort of having fun with those ideas and, keeping them alive and sort of getting people excited about them. So I think it's really sort of an entire group fandom thing. And I would say it sort of appears less, well, as things sort of like, I think you see it a lot on Lower Decks, which is like the memes or the ideas or the sort of like drop-in jokes that have sort of persisted, pop up there all the time. And I also think that, it's been a journey sort of, and I think they're still sort of figuring out what things to touch and what things and how to interact with things that people feel really really connected to.
I'm talking about the new generation of shows that Kurtzman
exactly.
and the team are helming.
Yeah, I think it's been a real journey, and I think anybody would know that there's been, some missteps, but I also think they're really starting to figure it out. And I think it's exciting, and I think that they're making some really, really smart decisions.
And I think you don't necessarily have to be a fan to create Star Trek, but I find some of these content creators, like, I don't know if I should name any, but
no, don't.
There are neutral ones that talk about the good and the bad, and it's almost like more, I wouldn't say like the kind of crapping on kind of everything is crap about this and there's nothing good. People will say, I love this, but I have an issue with this. I like this, but I don't like this. And I'm old school generation Trek fan. Like TNG was the first show that I ever watched. And I grew to love DS9. Now it's like the best one. And I appreciate the newer shows tackling issues like there are gay characters on there now, which they never had before. It just was that simple. They never had any main characters who were gay. And now you have non-binary representation. And I may have my little issues with all of the new Trek shows. I love Lower Decks. I don't know what it is about Lower Decks. It just brings me so much joy. And I love that Mike McMahon, he's an example of a fan that really is like in his like own little playground now, and he's making good content. But I find constructive criticism online is probably the best. It's the most appealing to me, because I find that people who just want to crap on everything, the reasons are often overshadowed by grand generalizations, and it usually involves complaining to some degree about woke this offends me for some reason, and woke that, and it's like, I don't get it. I don't get that mentality, so I have to switch off. But I find the more positive YouTubers not necessarily like loving everything about all Trek and just kissing its ass all day long. But Jesse Gender is a great one, and Trek Yards, I'll just say it, Trek Yards are pretty neutral. They say good and bad things. They're very critical about like aesthetics, and that's fine. And I'm not offended by people who complain about everything modern Trek if they had good reasons for saying so. But once they get into saying stuff like, you're an idiot if you like this stuff, I hate that mentality. We get a lot of that online. If you dive deep enough down into the rabbit hole, you're just like, you can't even interact with some people because their minds are set and they're like, they didn't watch the show. They're just listening they're just listening to some person, and it's literally all about making money. And if you look at Star Trek on YouTube daily, sadly enough, when big news breaks, you'll often see the most negative ones with the most views. And it's like somebody who has a positive thing or a neutral thing to say about it, or is just like talking about it. They don't get noticed, and that's not an issue for me because I'm not a YouTuber. I'm very casual. I just do like watch-alongs, and I did a watch-along of Star Trek Discovery seasons 1, 2, and 3 with Starfleet Boy, and Sean was on too. And I like doing that kind of like stuff where not a lot of people are gonna watch and like get mad at me type of thing if I say something insensitive inadvertently or something like that. But I just appreciate people who are smart enough to know not to be blinded by the fact that this isn't the Star Trek you grew up with. It's a different. It's going boldly in different directions, and I understand like the studios probably do pay attention to, like the honest criticism, I would say.
Yeah,
anyway, rant over.
No, I love the stuff that Jessie does. I was on her channel a long time ago and have been following her since then. And it's also fun to watch her sort of like watch Voyager and critique Voyager. I don't think there's anything wrong with critique,
Yeah.
I think, what sucks is that when the sort of like negative stuff really pushes through, and especially because it's so tied into like, anti-woke culture pushing an SJW agenda, the actors
It just feeds the YouTube
the actors
algorithm.
the actors know that, and the actors and people who work on the show are less encouraged to interact with fans. And as a fan, I find that really disappointing, because I do think that one of the great things about Star Trek is this sort of relationship between the fans and the stars, and pushing a sort of wedge, being forced in between that, is disappointing for me on a personal level, because it just is, it sucks. It really sucks.
Well, from what I've seen, sitting back, on our side of the fence, from what I've seen, what I seem to notice, I think, is that, like you were saying earlier, it's not so much specifics that are taken into consideration by the creatives, but it's just like general ideas. Like, generally speaking, without even taking into consideration all of the hate groups, generally speaking, I think everyone kind of said, what's the deal with the Klingons?
Right.
And so a lot of the fandom kind of was like, with the Klingons, and so, well, they found us. I could go on for ages about how I found that hair wasn't the solution, but there was like an answer or a solution that was presented to a problem that I think a lot of fans that were just, I suppose, constructively criticizing. And then the same thing happened for the holographic communications. My fingers are crossed for like the turbo lifts that go on indefinitely inside the ships. I think that maybe someone in the creative team will eventually, hear about how people find that ridiculous. But that's the kind of influence I think that fandom has at this point. It's more of like a general, once there's, like you say, it's not memes, but maybe once there's like a general vibe or a general idea going on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever it is, then that kind of catches on with the creatives.
I absolutely love the characters in Discovery and the actors as well. Like Doug Jones, he was so interactive early on, like on Twitter and Facebook when I had Facebook. And even Anson Mount, when he got into the mix, he was very interactive and friendly. And you got to understand, I try to imagine at some point you're just seeing too much of like the negativity that you're just like, I don't even want to. I know there's good people out there who want to compliment me and want to praise me, but I think I'm going to take a break from that. I think sometimes social media can be toxic for people who are in the limelight kind of thing.
I was going to say, Noah, was it overwhelming to all of a sudden be part of Star Trek? Like, because I can imagine how just terrifying it would be for like a main cast member, like so Nick Martin Green gets cast as Michael Burnham. I'm imagining just like the post, the Twitters, like everyone's just all over.
For me, this is the kind of thing you dream about, is like, oh, I get to like, somebody wants to ask me about Star Trek and then I get to talk about it. You know what I mean? And I think one of the things that actually works in my favor of like not having done a lot of episodes is I sort of actually got out before it sort of turned a little bit, so I got to do my little thing. I got to have a great time, but I also sort of didn't stick around long enough to sort of get overwhelmed by everything, you know? So, I mean, I've had a great time interacting with people. I've had really, really positive interactions. The response to me has been great. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, like, I'm a white guy, you know, in a max, because I've seen my female friends on the show and my friends of color on the show not have that experience, you know? So I definitely have, like, I'm in a privileged spot in that, you know? And my friends who are, you know, in the LGBTQ plus community, it's been a challenge for them, and so
That's so sad.
it's disappointing. You know, it's really disappointing as a fan who is having these really, really positive interactions with fans, that the rest of the cast isn't necessarily having that experience, you know? But I will say that for me, it has also, you know, provided an opportunity to, you know, direct people and say, you know, hey, this is a good little fan community here, you know. This is the sort of things, let me cherry pick some of this stuff that I'm seeing fans say, that, you know, this character is so meaningful to me. You know, watching you on screen has absolutely affected me in this super positive way. And being able to pull those out and bring those to people has really meant a lot to me, and meant a lot to the actors, because I think they want to be a part of that too. You know, everybody wants their work to be recognized and appreciated, especially when it really is personal, you know? And I think a lot of what they're doing is very personal. So, you know, personally for me, it's been amazing. And I haven't really had many negative experiences. And I, you know, also, like, I just think that I wasn't really around long enough to really draw people's ire, you know, which I understand can happen. But yeah, I've just had a really good time, and, you know, it does help that in a lot of ways, I really consider myself more on the fan side of the table. You know, it's challenging for me to think of myself on the actor side of the table, because I consider myself a fan and I see myself as a fan. And when I interact with other fans, it feels more like a fan interacting with another fan.
Your 3-day experience, your 3-episode experience was just like a convention. You were cosplaying.
It sort of felt like I won a contest or something, and everybody's asking me how it went, you know? So I feel like I just have a unique sort of experience with that. And I feel like it's also been able to sort of to just, like, sort of loosen everybody up. You know, Mary and I have been watching Deep Space Nine, and I think it's been really fun. And I think part of that is sort of, you know, her being curious, you know, like you were saying, why is this show the best one? As opposed to feeling like, oh, I'm just going to get yelled at if I say
it is the most bingeable one, you'll find out, like,
true.
it's, yeah.
And we're having a great time.
I would argue Voyager, but that's just me. That's because I'm a fanboy of Voyager.
You know, there's no wrong answer, as we all know.
Correct.
Even though the correct answer is Deep Space Nine, but there's no wrong answer.
How far are you into the show now?
We've been moving slowly. We're just sort of halfway. We're probably 2/3 of the way through season 1.
Once you hit season 2, both of you will stop working altogether and then just keep on watching.
You know, it's going to take a lot less than season 2 of DS9 to get me to stop working, so no problem there.
Is this the first time you're? No, obviously it's not the first time you're watching it. It's the first time.
DS9 is it's sort of like a lot of my Star Trek watching experience is a little spotty. You know, since I grew up watching it, I'm constantly encountering episodes that I've either totally forgotten or haven't even seen. And DS9 particularly is actually probably, of the sort of outside of, like, the original series, is my weakest link, because when I was growing up and I was younger, I was watching Next Gen. And then when I was sort of watching it with my mom, DS9 had sort of fallen off, or it ended, and I was watching Voyager. And then I, you know, for the first time, went actual episode to episode, week to week with Enterprise. So DS9 just sort of got lost in the mix. So this is actually, it's been fun for me because I've sort of seen, you know, I've maybe seen, like, randomly all of season 3 and 4, and I've of course have seen, like, sort of all the major episodes of it. But there's just a ton that that winds up being really new to me, which is super fun.
There's some great first season episodes like Captive Pursuit and Babel.
Yeah, it's been great. It's super good, you know, and then the pilot is awesome, and it's just like it's really funny to watch shows from the late '90s because it's a completely different. It's just a completely different way of making television. Like you just could not make television, especially science fiction television, like that anymore.
Has the dynamic changed, by the way, since like between you two now that she's kind of more of a Trekkie, I guess, than she was before? Because Mary Wiseman wasn't into Star Trek before she got cast, right?
No, her connection to Star Trek was me before she
Was
got cast.
you basically fanboying at the dinner table talking about Star Trek all the time?
Exactly. And my mom, you know, it hasn't changed that much because it's still pretty much the same, which is like she will come to me like, hey, can you explain this meme or this concept to me? And so I'll go on some diatribe and then I'll go to Memory Alpha and she'll be like, all right, you know what? I never mind. I don't need to hear about this anymore.
It's like 50 pages on Memory Alpha.
Exactly. So nothing really has changed. I just think, you know, she's she she knows you know, I probably just shouldn't ask anymore. I'll go look it up myself.
Well, has she gone from putting up with it to appreciating it, I guess? Or was it never like that? Because in the beginning with my wife, like she knew nothing about Star Trek, and I'd talk about, because every time I see a movie, I always compare it to, oh, well, in Star Trek, there's an episode like that, right? Like that's what we do. And then she was like, ugh. But now she's seen all of it, so she kind of better appreciates what I'm talking about when I say that. I haven't changed. I still do it.
I think she feels a lot less sort of like intimidated by it. Not that she was ever actually intimidated, but there's just so much, you know. There's so many episodes. There's so many iconic things that people at a convention will come up and say to you, and you're like, what the fuck did they just say to you? You know what I mean? Like, I have no idea what you're talking. Oh, you remind me of so and so, and she's just like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I think a lot of that has gone away, and now I think she really does feel kind of ownership of her sort of part of Star Trek. You know, hey, this is, you know, I really do own this part, and for the pieces that I don't understand that well, either I'll go watch the episode or I'll go figure out, or I don't care. You know what I mean? Like, it's okay that I don't know every single piece of Star Trek, because I can sort of own my piece of Star Trek.
Yeah, well, that's cool. That's nice. What do you think, PJ?
I think DS9, like as a kid, I didn't appreciate it nearly as much. I started really watching when Worf came in. I was like, oh, Worf's there now. I've got to watch it. And then, you know, years later, and it wasn't until I saw the documentary What We Left Behind, 2018, in a theater with the HD remastered DS9 footage, which looks so amazing. And I rewatched the entire season. I binged it like every chance I could get. I watched an episode. And at first it was, you know, they say the first season and all that is, second season is a bit wobbly, but it really does tie very well into the end of the series. If you really like pay attention.
Well, they mentioned the Dominion War in that first season, which is something I had forgotten.
There's so much information.
My last rewatch.
They dump so much information on you in just the first episode. The Bajoran, the provisional government, and this Cardassian station that Starfleet is involved in, and the Bajorans and the wormhole, and they give you a lot, and you don't really care about it at first. I find if it's like your first time watching it,
if you don't know what's coming.
Yeah, and it's like, why are people yelling? And it's like, as a kid, I found it was like a soap opera almost. You know what I mean?
It is a very adult show in terms of its theme, which is sort of like post-occupation reconstruction is not really approachable for a 11-year-old who just watched Next Gen, where, you know, Sherlock Holmes and was doing something with Moriarty, you know?
Yeah, it's totally an adult. It's not. It really will go over the heads of even kids now, I think, that try to get into Star Trek through Deep Space Nine. I think it's, if you want to get an adult into Star Trek in general, I think that's the best show, because if you can get through, it's not like I'm not saying you have to get through the first two seasons, but if you have some patience, it gets better and better and better until it's like, I don't know, it's just so good.
Well, at
And
the
I love
risk
how
of-
people appreciate it now. People are actually almost like talking about wokeness. People are waking up to DS9 now in a way that I never would have imagined.
Yeah, at the risk of feeling of being insulted by people, but I kind of agree with Kurtzman on how Star Trek has never had a show that's been like for kids. Yes, a lot of us grew up watching like TNG or Voyager, but a lot of the episodes are very adult.
Yeah.
Thematically, there's a lot of horror stories. So yeah, it makes sense to have a show like where we haven't seen Prodigy yet, but it makes sense to have a show that's aimed specifically for kids.
Well, TOS was very adult oriented, and contrary to some belief out there that was watched by a lot of kids, yes, some kids did grow up on TOS, but the main demographic was like older, educated people, college students and stuff like that. So
Yeah, that
I mean,
makes sense. And I actually think that even like the animated series that was like was that a Sunday morning cartoon that used to air? I don't think too
The-
many kids were watching that. I
the
think adults
animated
were watching
series
it.
I didn't like at all. It was too boring for me. Now I love it. It's weird. And the fact that I think TNG is probably the most kid friendly out of all of them. I mean, in terms of, the older shows, because, you have the dark subject matter in DS9. You also have some like really gross horror elements in Voyager.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Enterprise gets pretty adult as well.
Oh yeah. We're rubbing
Probably
down each other
in the wrong ways, yeah.
Yeah.
In the ways that
Well,
I don't
yeah.
want to be an adult.
Yeah, but like even without talking about like what they were doing with like the decon chamber and what have you, Archer gets pretty intense in like season 3.
Right.
So that's not very kid friendly, I guess, with like suffocating people and what have you.
I like that Prodigy is, some people are like, Star Trek's always been for kids. I get that, but I mean, they don't understand that Paramount means that it's made so it's kid friendly is the right
Yeah.
term. It's very kid
Kids have
friendly, so
always
it won't
watched Star
it won't
Trek.
have
That's
anything
different.
like I saw the Suicide Squad last night. And there were children there, and one little girl almost like got sick watching it. And I'm like, why did you take? It's like her grandfather, I think. Like, why'd you take this young girl to see this gory movie? It's like, but I think Prodigy is it would be if it's good. I mean, children aren't stupid. I mean, they know quality TV and quality storytelling. I mean, I knew it when I was a kid. Not so much like the more adult stuff, but I knew the good kids shows. Like, and I was very critical of like repetitive storylines and like, oh, they did this is like an episode of My Pet Monster they did earlier, or something like that. But I mean, I don't know. I just want to ask you, Noah, did you see the trailer for Prodigy? And
I did. I think it's it's great. I'm excited. I think it's also like in the early 90s or in the 90s and the early 2000s, like there wasn't the same. It's just not the same entertainment landscape. You know what I mean? Like you can't put out a show and expect kids to watch it because their parents are watching it. They're going to take an iPad and they're going to go upstairs and watch somebody, unbox some Pokemon cards or whatever. I guess adults will watch that too. But, it just isn't the same entertainment landscape in any way that we all grew up on. And I think it's great because the reality is that, Trek fans are going to start dying at some point, and there needs to be new ones, and new ones won't show up right now for, adult themed content because there's content that is made just for them, so I think it's great. And I think it's going to be this sort of window for a lot of younger kids to get into Star Trek, which will just sort of open up this whole new world for them, which is exciting. And I also think they've done a good job, at least on Discovery with Ian and Blue, Adira and Gray. Like, I also think both of them are going to be the bridge for a lot of younger Trek fans as well to come in. So I think that for people who feel maybe a little gatekeepy about it, that it is like a challenge, because it's like, oh, well, we're just trying to get people in. But I think that's great. I think as many people as you can let through the gates and you know, designing it specifically to make it attractive and entertaining and fun for those people to come on in and to sort of get to participate in this whole world, and you know, even making sure that the conventions are fun for younger people as well, a fun place to come like any other con or you know, whatever. I think it's great because the more people, the merrier.
And
I
if people
agree.
are out there concerned about too much Star Trek oversaturation, quantity over quality, blah blah blah, just rest assured it is not your money that's being spent. But
Yeah.
goddamn, these shows, like the money they put into Discovery
Yeah.
and Picard, and even like the quality of Lower Decks is amazing. I mean,
Yeah.
Jesus.
It's really something once you get on those sets and you see that money in person. It is really, really something. Yeah, I mean, again, it's just like it's a totally different world, you know. It just has to be a completely different product to be able to compete and be taken seriously.
Did you grow an appreciation for actors in heavy makeup when you were in that makeup? Because I heard horror stories about how it feels like so terrible to be under a mask.
Well,
Foamy
Michael
attacks.
Dorn lost pigmentation, didn't he? Like
Well,
it was taking
so
out pigmentation from his skin.
Dorn had something else, you know. So it's a different thing because basically probably actually pre the first JJ movie, well, not all, but most of the prosthetics were not like this full mask. They were sort of individual prosthetic pieces. I think even, you know, even Armin Shimmerman and the Ferengi, like they had like a top piece, but their mouths were essentially exposed and painted with, you know, prosthetic pieces glued to their face. Whereas now in modern prosthetics, because my understanding is that's changed because the camera definition is so much better that those prosthetic pieces, you can really see the seams in them.
Yeah.
I don't know that for sure, but that's just what I heard. You know, as somebody was jabbing a pencil in my eye.
Sometimes, like when you see HD transfers of older Trek, you will see the seams that you never saw before.
Exactly.
The outline of the eyes, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. You know, now it's essentially like a full mask that wraps around your entire head. It goes into your mouth, essentially up to your eyeballs, you know. So it's not to take anything away from how intense it was for anybody else, but I can only really speak to that experience because I didn't do that other stuff. And so it definitely gave me an appreciation for what Doug is able to do, because it's a really, really challenging thing. You know, my makeup artist, Mike, he worked on the Grinch makeup for Jim Carrey. And that was a similar thing where it was a full mask. And he was telling me the story about how one day Carrey just kind of like lost it on set and started like ripping the makeup off of his face, which would be extremely painful. And sort of from the outside, you think, he said, Jim Carrey said, like, you know, he hired like CIA people to teach him how to withstand torture so he could do this. And from the outside, that sounds like so dramatic and actor stuff, but on the inside, it's absolutely true. It is truly a torture technique. You know, that's the only way to describe it. And you're either sort of have it, you know, you can either sort of sit there while you are devoured by this face stuff, or you just can't, you know, because it really feels like your head, it's almost like if your head was inserted into the mouth of a giant octopus that was trying to consume you very slowly over 18 hours. It really, your whole body basically doesn't understand what's going on, and it thinks you're being consumed. So it starts to just like shut down. Like I never really like nap. I don't fall asleep. I would constantly just fall asleep because your body is like, hey, I think this is it for you. So we're just going to turn this off. You know, you should just probably go to sleep and go ahead and get ready to pass away as you're eaten by this giant squid. So it's just a really, really challenging, difficult experience that is not for everyone. It definitely gave me appreciation for, you know, everyone who has done that. And I only had to do it for like a month or two. I can't imagine what it's like going to work every day and having to do that. I truly
Are you
can't.
afraid though? Now that you've agreed to it once, that all of the other shows are going to come after you for that?
No, they can hire me. Absolutely not. No, I was like, I was talking about a manager. He's like, "Are you just like a prosthetics actor now?" And I was like, I'm like, I could be. I'd be happy to be. I'd love to do it, but it is just very taxing. I think what I
3
found is that
episodes at a time, right?
exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's the key. What I found is that I can do it. You know what I mean? I am one of the people who can sit in the chair for 5 hours and then just, go go with it. And I just don't think, and it's not a knock on anybody, but it's just definitely not something that everybody can do. And I don't know, I would have to really come up with some survival strategies if I was ever going to do it that long. Because it is just a really, really intense experience. And, especially at the beginning where they were still figuring out how it was supposed to look. And, in the first episode, I had this beard, this sort of Andorian beard, and each one of those hairs was glued on individually and then cut to fit my face. So the whole process took 5.5 hours at the start. And that's just a long time to sit in one place. And the process of getting the mask on and off is not comfortable,
Because you can't even speak, can you? You have to like keep your mouth shut, and
you can't speak because they're essentially spray painting the mask.
You can't put an earbud in and listen to like some sort of podcast.
Definitely
either.
not, because my ears were completely covered.
Yeah, so you're just sitting there,
you
waiting
just
for
sit
time
there.
to pass.
Yeah, you just sit there. As they are obviously very respectful and kind and do their best, but essentially they're just spray painting your face and painting the insides of your eyelids and gluing something to your lips. And, it's just like the worst doctors. It's like if every different type of doctor, like an eye doctor, a nose doctor, an ear doctor, a mouth doctor, a barber, and a dentist all tried to glue a football helmet to your head. It's an intense thing. And you just sit there. And then it's also, it's and then you have to act, and then you're like, what the hell? One of the great things I think about the masks is it can really do a lot of the acting for you, because they are very challenging to manipulate. They don't really respond super well to subtle facial movements. I do think that is one of the things that you sort of lose with this new style of prosthetic, is the sort of subtlety of the facial movements. But what you gain is that if you can sort of make how dramatic and how intense these masks work or look, then they can actually do sort of a lot of the acting work for you, which is a really fun toy to get to play with.
I think PJ, you talked about that, how like they lightened up the Laurel makeup in later seasons, but that also enabled Mary Chieffo to like emote better because it was lighter around the eyes, lighter around the mouth.
And yeah, it's noticeable that her makeup is a bit heavier in season 1. But I mean, I think one day, and probably not anytime soon, just because of the cost of it, they might start experimenting with digital prosthetic makeup. And they did some of that in WandaVision with Paul Bettany. He didn't have to wear the makeup he did in the films, and I didn't know that. I didn't even know until they released the special. So it didn't stand out to me at all the whole time I watched it. So
yeah, well,
I just thought he was in makeup.
I'll be out of a job I didn't even have if they start doing that.
Well, actually, I know we're not supposed to talk
you
about
have the actor
Oval too
perform
much,
on set, and you just do that face, or you put the digital makeup.
Right.
I know it sounds, I don't know, maybe it sounds far fetched now, but I think
because
eventually we'll get to a point.
Baby on the
And it
Oval.
wouldn't, and I think the prosthetic makeup people, it wouldn't take away from their jobs necessarily. They would still be designing it, and then like you scan their designs.
Well, the makeup artist might be pretty pissed, but the designers sound like they'll be happy.
Well, that's like
Actually,
the debacle with Jurassic Park, right?
Like you do one makeup once, then they photo scan it all, and then you don't have to get in the makeup any other time, just that one time.
The poor CGI puppet guys from Jurassic Park were really angry when the digital stuff got introduced. And then the digital guys were like, we really don't know how to make these dinosaurs move. So they used the stop motion dinosaurs as reference. So it all worked out, essentially. But Yeah, there's always going to be like a change in like how certain things are done because
Definitely.
I mean, you would still have people in prosthetic makeup, but the more complicated stuff, say. I mean, you do have actors now. His name escapes me. The Saurian, Linus.
Yes.
It's a combination of CGI and practical makeup stuff like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great point.
It makes that all the more believable.
Yeah, they really nailed the eyes on the Saurian. Like they look a lot better than those original Saurians from what was it, the original the motion picture, I think it was.
I'm so glad they didn't mess with your voice in the show too, because
that was a pet peeve.
One of my
PJ had a
nitpicks
pet peeve. Yeah, he didn't like.
One of my nitpicks was like, why do their Andorians all sound like this? It's like Shran didn't sound like that, and then when your character showed, I'm like, season 3, none of them. They didn't do that, and I was like,
Did they do that in season 2? Did they modulate the voices? I didn't remember that.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah,
but in season 3, no one was modulated, but all of the Andorians were very clearly Canadian.
Well, that's really that's so true. Yeah, that's one of the funny things about when you're shooting this show in Toronto, because of the way contracts work. You have to have a certain number of Canadian actors, and so you can really tell. You can really tell
the banter between the Andorian and the Orion.
It was so Canadian. That's right. Yeah, in episode 1. Oh, that's really funny. Those guys were funny, but they were also very Canadian. So that's a strike for and a strike against.
No. That's 2 strikes for. Now that you've kind of you were stressed out about filling Shran's shoes or Jeffrey Combs' shoes, do you think you'll be back in Star Trek as much as he was? You'll be doing all of these different characters.
People always ask me that, and I always tell them no, because Jeffrey Combs is a good actor and I'm not. So he can do that. I can't do that. I don't have a bunch of different characters ready to go. He's too good. But
the makeup does everything. They'll just throw a couple of ears on you.
But that's what makes him a 6'4" Ferengi. I'd love to see it. I'm ready to go. Listen, of course I'd love to be back, but it's just such a different thing where, as opposed to sort of you're just like burning in the midnight oil to make 24 episodes and you need to bring in people that you can trust again and again. It's not quite like that anymore, and especially the fact that it's in Canada, you can't really you have a certain quotas to meet. So, if it happens, of course, I would love to be back.
I'm sure you could voice someone on like Lower Decks.
Listen, I whatever, if they ask me to,
we'll start
lay on the floor and somebody can walk on me like I'm the floor grading, I'm happy to do it. But in the meantime, I'm just sort of happy with what I did get to do, as opposed to sort of, I could be in a position where I really didn't get to do all the things that I hoped that I would get to do someday. But I really feel like if this is all I get to do on Trek, I will be more than satisfied. And I can always go back to set, nobody's stopping me.
And you got lucky dip too with Andorians, like apart from the makeup thing, but you kind of got lucky dip in the sense that there wasn't that much established, so you could kind of do whatever you wanted. But
exactly,
they're also kind of established as a very, very important species nonetheless.
100%. Very lucky. I love that. That's just so fun.
All right, well, that's about it. We've gone on for a bit longer than an hour. Do you guys have any final statements about fans and their influence on the franchise now, before?
Well, to all the fans out there, I'm sure Rin is your favorite character, but if you want to come hang out with me more, I've got a Twitch channel where I've been playing Star Trek Online. Yes. I go by the Type 1 Trekkie on there, and that's been super fun and just another way to kind of hang out with fans, talk Star Trek, play Star Trek video games, which is sort of like a fun, weird thing that I feel like hasn't been explored enough. So come hang out with me there and come see me. And
they need to make more Star Trek video games.
I'm trying to be
better Star Trek video games.
I'm trying to be on the cutting edge of that and build a groundswell for that.
BJ, you got any last words about fandom?
I think fandom is great, only when it's not. There you go.
That's a good one. I like that.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. Yes, I was going to talk about your Twitch, because you do stream on Twitch. So everyone go check that out. I'll put some links in the description for everyone.
Amazing.
You guys can also check out PJ. You guys know him, Boatrek. He's got those wonderful watch-alongs that he does with Starfleet Boy.
Oh yeah, I'm doing DS9 now.
I can only attend now and then. But I will be there for Duet. I told you I'd be there for Duet because I love that episode.
That's weeks away.
Yeah. That's why I said do it as well. I love the episode, but I know it's like 18
Yeah,
weeks.
it's a really good one.
All right, and yeah, that's it. Thank you guys so much for listening. As usual, live long and prosper.